Welcome back to another edition of Inside the ACC. I'm Joe DeLeone, and joining me, former Florida State and Tennessee coach Jay Graham. Today, Jay, we're going to be talking about Clemson, their stretch of success recently, but also failures this season, as Dabo Swinney has been under a lot of fire for his performance on the field for the Clemson Tigers. Now, we know what happened with the phone call from a fan on his coach's show, and that was a very tense point for this program, but apparently was a rallying spot for Clemson for them to pick up a win against Notre Dame. I want to start this conversation off, Jay, on this one note. Do you think them beating Notre Dame is enough to absolve some of the other problems that they've had this year? It feels like we're kind of forgetting the fact that they have 4 losses, and we're all back to saying, and he even said it, if you want to, if they were a stock, you got to buy in now. Do you think it maybe clears things up, makes us feel a little bit better, or do you think this is just kind of a distraction from their lack of success on the field this year?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think, honestly, you have to have those signature wins. Um, obviously, there's been some turnover. There's been some turnover in coaches, and guys don't realize you keep having guys leave early, right? And you experienced this at Florida State. Eventually, you're gonna have a difficult year, right? You have guys that play early. You have freshmen that come in and play 4 years, right? Or 3 years and leave out, right? Eventually, you're gonna have guys there that have not played so much because of the guys in front of them, right? And then you have an older guy with not a lot of experience, right? And I'm not saying that's the case, but it is the case in some spots, right? Eventually you have a quarterback that comes in and he's like 5-star, all this and that, but it's like the pressure of the situation he can't handle, like DJ that went on to Oregon State, right? And he went to an area that's less pressure that fits him a little bit better, right? And he goes on to play well. That's the kind of things that happened at Florida State, and they're experiencing those things, at Clemson. After winning championships, after playing in a national championship game, after being a perennial top 2 team every year. Fans begin to expect that like all the time, and they say, the sky is falling. They're sitting here 5-4, right? They have a season to finish, and they have to rebuild. This happens with programs. You get to a point, position coaches go be head coaches at Oklahoma. I'm surprised they kept it together as long as they did. Tony Elliott went on to Virginia. He's running that program. Eventually, you got to reach from outside of the program to go get your OC or defensive coordinator. So that becomes a little bit of a learning process. Now the words aren't the same, right? And these guys have to relearn. The younger guys have to relearn. The program has to they're refurbished and get ready to go. And I think this is a very important time. Dabo Swinney is a phenomenal coach, one of my favorite. And I've been around him a lot. As a young coach, he was a assistant coach. He took time with me to show me the ropes of what he does, right? When that's when you're young, you're just going around. So I know he's a really good coach. He has a group and a staff of really good coaches. They run it the same way. They run it the right way. And I think that's the key is getting everybody on the same page to get it going. So to answer your question, yes, that win is very important because it's important for the young men that are there now. Because the program is like it's coming back. You had a little drop right here, it's coming right back up to where it should be. They're just rebuilding that program. And Alabama did have some years like this, right? They did have some years like this. People go because they always compare him to Nick. Nick did have, the year Florida State won a national championship in 2013. They had some struggles, but their struggles were still in the bowl game and going like, 10-3, or something like that, right? So it's like, are your low years really low? And I don't think it will be for Clemson.
My biggest issue, I think, with Clemson this year that's held them back is, and it's highly talked about, is the transfer portal and his
Sure.
unwillingness to attack it and utilize it. And it's really funny to listen to that call that he had where a fan called into the coach's show and was criticizing him. And part of his response was, to Coach K not have bad years. But we look back at and we look at that example where Coach K was a basketball coach in a situation where there's a lot more roster turnover. And there was also a period of time in Coach K's career where one and dones were starting to become very prevalent in basketball. And he was unwilling to adapt to it and then eventually did adapt to it. And I think
Yeah.
that Dabo, if he wants to compare himself to him, he has to make that change. He has to be willing to not solely focus on um, turnover of guys on his roster and developing the guys on the roster, because at times in this modern world of college football, you're going to have roster holes. And the way that you fix those roster holes is hopping into the portal. You are a premier brand. You're going to have an easier time than most programs of attracting and bringing in those guys. The craziest part about all this is it's not even a position for them that's holding them back that is hard to get in the transfer portal. Offensive linemen are impossible to come by. Defensive
Right.
linemen, impossible to come by. I mean, a guy from a school that I played at, University of Rhode Island, was
Mhm.
one of the highest sought after offensive linemen. And then there was nobody really after that. And Johnny Cornelius is playing great at Oregon. Shout out to him. But we see that they just need receivers. They just need to get themselves some better receivers. They are right now one of the worst teams statistically in yards per completion. They're just not getting separation. A lot of their production is coming from tight ends. And you look at their recruiting classes, there's been a little bit of a slight regression, not a significant amount that would warrant this massive drop off, but it's as simple as attracting and bringing in some of these bigger name receivers. If they could have gotten an Adonai Mitchell if he was interested in transferring to Clemson, guys like that hopped in the portal at the receiver position. For me, I think a clear step forward, and I will be more willing to accept that Dabo's taking this in a different direction, is if this upcoming portal class, he can pull one or two top 100 portal prospects. I think that is a reasonable thing considering how big their brand is and how sought after joining that program is for them to go and get some of these premier receivers that do enter the portal.
I agree with you. I think the NIL is a perfect opportunity for them to do that. Now I'm a Duke fan. Okay, so when Calipari had all the one and dones and Mike Krzyzewski was against it, right? Coach K, um, he wasn't really against it, right? But he wanted to see how it worked, right? He wanted to understand it. He wanted to see it, and he was slow to do it. But once he did it right
Mm.
because Coach K couldn't afford to do it wrong, just based on how he did things, right? And I think about Dabo in this way. Dabo, he's done it his way, and he's gotten to this point, right? And they won championships. They have a perennial top 5 program in how it's run. I went through the facilities this summer. Their facilities are phenomenal. The way they do things phenomenal. The way they run camp and everything else is the way you should. So you look at those things, right? That's culture, right? And it's very important in culture that you look at who you put in that program. I think it's very important. They've always recruited in a different way, different types of young men that fit their culture, and they've done a great job of that. So yes, he will get. I know he will get in the transfer portal. At some point. But it will be on his time based on his program and how he wants it done. He wants to see that everything gets worked out. And every little kink. And I know we've been 3 years into this portal thing, right? But it's just he's an old wily vet, and he understands. Hey, this culture is key as far as how we do things and how things get done. And I know the coaches within that program, they understand the problems and the things they got to get going in order to get back to that level. But I think he's going to get in it. But I think it may be now. This might be the time now, but it might be next year that they start finding the right type of guys. And I would imagine it'd be guys that they recruited before that they have relationships with that didn't go to Clemson, but fit their mold. I
Mm.
think they're going to go back and look at those things. And those are the type of guys who may have a degree, that's coming back over, 5th-year transfers that they may go after.
I'm sure that Dabo will find a way to turn this program around. Again, you said it, very good football coach, just a bit of a lull in his timeline of coaching. This weekend they're playing against Georgia Tech. They're playing against a team that has played spoiler for a
Man.
lot of teams this year. A lot of teams this year. They beat UNC, they beat Miami, and shockingly enough, the betting line for this game is very big. It's like 14 and a half. When I took it, I was very surprised by a lot of books assuming that this game was going to be a blowout. I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm not trying to completely drag down Clemson here, but
Yeah.
I just think that Georgia Tech team has been really scrappy, and with an offense for Clemson that's not exactly putting up a crap load of points, there's a path here that not so much Georgia Tech winning, but keeping this game close.
Well, you look at the history though. When Georgia Tech goes to Clemson, it's usually not good for Georgia Tech, right? And it's usually a game they've upset Clemson before when they've had top ranked teams, right? And it's always been at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has always played tough there. You know, I remember Florida State team that lost their first ACC game in 3 years was at Georgia Tech. So it's interesting. The Tech coaches are really good. You know, and
Mm.
they got a bunch of experienced, really good coaches, and they found a way to develop these kids into contenders. That team, that program is growing. You know, and it's growing, and they're winning some signature games. So this could be a different team as far as that's concerned when they go into Clemson. But I think Clemson is starting to roll, and it's like when you got everything in place, which I think they do at Clemson, and you get the faith of, hey, oh man, it's like you got the process, but you really trust it when it equals out to a win. Let's just be honest. We're talking about young men, and they're looking at it like, oh, now I see why this process worked. We went through adversity, so they'll get rolling really fast. And when that momentum gets rolling at Clemson, they're going to win some games. So I would imagine that I think the spread should be 14. I think this is
Oh,
going to be a tough game for Georgia Tech because
mm.
I think Clemson is getting rolling at the right time, and they don't want to see that other team, that they were 2 weeks ago. They don't want to see that team for a while, right?
Yeah.
Because they get the pat on the back, and these guys like, "Thank you, I'm finally. Let's go. Let's get out of these doldrums and go play some football."
All right. Well, I hope you're wrong on that because then I'm going to be. I need to make some money off of that bet
Oh
that I threw
no!
down there. I just need 13 points, Jay. I just need 13 points. I don't need anything more than that. I hope your prediction's a little bit wrong. But last thing I want to get to before we wrap this episode, talking about the performance on Thursday night with Louisville and with Virginia. Virginia has also been one of those teams that, despite their record, they're 2-8 now.
Right.
Despite that, they're still playing guys close. They're playing teams close. They're fighting. They're scratching and clawing. They've got a lot of issues. They're battling through adversity of what happened last year, and it's going to take some time to really
Mm-hmm.
get this team back to a very competitive point. But they're at least showing up and
Yes.
fighting until the very, very end. They've also dealt with a lot of injuries, and there's been this one
Mm-hmm.
freshman kid who's been coming in, Anthony Calandria at quarterback, who is so fun to watch. He also makes a lot of really head scratching decisions with the football, but he is fun. He is exciting. I want to go as far as to say this. I think that how close this game was on Thursday. I think that Louisville is a little bit of a they're deceptive. I don't think
Right.
that they're deserving of how highly ranked that they are. I think that Jeff Brom has put this team in a really good position, and he is a really good head coach. But as we're discovering here, they are just not beating up on these lower level teams enough to feel for me to feel justified of them being placed inside that top 15.
Well, you look at their team; it's really built, and I like teams built like this. Defensively, because you can really depend on them. Doing some things right and shutting some teams down. And here's the thing, though: defensively, you start getting guys beat up, or someone figures out this little bitty and into intricacies of what you do defensively, right? Because it's still offensive. They change and then defense adjusts. That's how defense have gone over time in college football. But you look at them, people are going to start to adjust to what they do defensively. And that game was 31-24 in Virginia. And I'll go back and flip to Virginia's side. Everything you mentioned about Virginia and what they do is, Tony Elliott is their head coach. Tony Elliott is one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. So he's going to figure out those little things. And I remember when they went against Tennessee, because I'm a University of Tennessee grad. So they went against Tennessee. I was going, ooh, if they wouldn't have got a sack right there, that ball would have been open for Virginia, right? If that quarterback would have saw the out route over here, it was open. So they're starting to see those things, right? They're starting to make those plays that they were just as close to making, that didn't decide, that you don't see on the score at the end. So they're starting to make those plays. So that score 31-24 says a lot. It says a lot about, they're starting to figure out defensively what Louisville's doing because they're built on shutting people down. They shut Duke down 23-0.
Mm.
You don't goose egg a team like that unless you're really good on defense, And when you're good on defense, the offense has the ball the whole time. You can get looks all day. But that score says a lot but it's not just about Louisville to me. I think it's
Mm.
both sides right there. But Louisville has to understand when they go play Kentucky, right? We'll find out how good they are. I think that's a good gauge game for them to see, where they fall. If they're a top 15 team in that game against Kentucky, which I think that's going to be a tougher game than what I said. I said on Twitter, I think there's no way Louisville's going to beat Kentucky. I think I'm going to eat my words. I'm feeling like I'm about to eat my words, but I'm still going with Kentucky right now because of that game, that last game, 31-24.
See, I just want before we close out here, I do think that Duke game though kind of plays into what I'm saying here because they beat up
Yeah,
on Duke 23-0 is a big performance, but to do that against a team with their backup quarterback and Henley Beelun Jr.'s he's fine, and I think that he's young and he's improving. And I do a show actually with his quarterback coach, so trying to put a positive spin on his performance, but they still can't move the ball the same way that they could with Riley Leonard, and
right.
I kind of think that score looks impressive on paper, but I feel like we're putting a lot of stock in Louisville, and they're getting lucky in a
Yeah,
way, they're getting
yeah.
lucky, and I guess sometimes you just need that.
Yes, you do. But I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying. You know, I really do, Joe. But I'm sitting here going, we'll know for sure, I think, that last week. Because I'm gonna tell you, Stoops is kind of like their team is kind of like that boxer in pro boxing. It's
Mm.
like they ain't gonna be the champion, but they decide who plays like who steps up past that into that next level of top 15, right? They're kind of the team that decides that, right? Tennessee played them. Missouri played them. You kind of see at the end here if they beat Louisville, I think that tells you and how they beat them, right? I think that tells you, what type of Louisville team you have right here. Are they outside of the top, outside of the bottom half of the top 25, right? Or are they up in that top 15?